The hymn that opened every council of the Vale Ascendancy began with a lie, and Lector Sumeth Vale had sung it 9,000 times before he learned it was one. He sang it again now, in the high dark of the reliquary spire, with 40 underlectors arranged below him on the prayer tiers, and the great bronze star chart turning slow overhead. The words were old. Humanity does not exist. There is no garden world of soft-skinned makers. There is no fleet of iron that crossed the deep before us. There is only the ascendancy, and the empty cradle the gods left for the worthy. He sang the words, and the underlectors sang them back, and the sound climbed the spire and was lost in its own echo. And Sumeth felt, as he always felt, the clean and certain peace of a thing repeated until it could not be doubted. He was 340 years old. He had spent 210 of them teaching the young that the humans were a story, a fright tale older priests had invented to frighten heretics into obedience, a name with no world and no ship and no breath behind it. He had taught it well. He believed it the way he believed the floor would hold his weight. And in 19 days he would stand on the observation gallery of the cathedral world Hessenreach and watch 1,100 human warships fall out of the deep above his sky, and he would understand, in the space between one breath and the next, that he had spent his whole life sleeping inside a lie, so large he had mistaken it for the wall of the world. But that was 19 days away. Tonight there was only the hymn. The vile ascendancy held 900 worlds. It had held them for 11,000 years, and in all that time it had answered every question a thinking thing could ask with the same 3 answers. What are we? We are the worthy. What is owed us? Everything the deep can hold. And what came before us? Nothing. Nothing came before us. The cradle was empty when the gods set us in it. That last answer was the load-bearing one. The whole tower of the faith stood on it. Because if something had come before, if some other people had crossed the deep first, and built and bled and looked up at the same stars with their own strange eyes, then the cradle was not empty, and the ascendancy was not the first, and the worthiness that justified 900 conquered worlds was just a story, a strong people told itself, while it took what it wanted. So the priests had made sure nothing came before. They had a name for the nothing, so that the young would have a shape to disbelieve in. They called the nothing humanity. Sumeth had built that shape into the minds of the young more carefully than any other lector of his age. It was his particular work, his calling within the calling. He had written the catechism of the empty cradle that every child of the ascendancy learned before it could read, the little verses that turned the absence into a friendly certainty. Where did the worthy come from? The empty cradle. Who came before? No one came before. And what of the fright tale? The soft-skinned makers, the iron fleet, the humans. They are the shape we give to nothing, so that the young may learn to disbelieve, and in disbelieving, grow strong. He had written that verse himself, 200 years ago, proud of its neatness. He had taught it to 1,000 classes of small ones. He had watched generations of the ascendancy grow up unafraid of the dark because he had given them a monster to not believe in, and he had thought, every time, that he was doing a kindness. A people that knows the dark is empty is a people that can do anything. He had not understood, until the 19th day, that he had not been emptying the dark. He had been emptying the children, hollowing out the part of them that might have looked up and wondered whether the dark was full, and whether the things it held might have songs of their own. The ascendancy did not wonder. That was the genius of the empty cradle, and its cruelty. A people that knows it is alone, and first owes nothing to anyone, because there is no one to owe. Every world it took was a world that had belonged to no one real, because the ascendancy had decided in advance that no one real could exist. The lie was not just a comfort, it was a permission, and Sumeth had spent 200 years writing the permission into the youngest minds of the faith, in friendly little verses, and calling it a kindness. Sumeth finished the hymn, the underlectors lowered their heads, and in the silence that followed, a junior of the catalogue order, a thin, pale-scaled creature named Resun Ko, who had not yet learned that some questions are not asked, raised one hand from the lowest tier. "Lector," Resun Ko said, "there is a thing in the deep watchlogs I do not understand." Sumeth should have sent the young one away. He nearly did. Later, in the years he had left, he would return to this moment more than any other, because it was the last moment. He was the man he had been for 300 years, and he had not known to hold on to it. "Speak," he said instead. "The far-listening array on the outer sill," said Resenko. "It catalogues every drifting thing in the dark beyond our worlds. Rocks, dead stars, the cold. 11 days ago it logged a sound. The deep is full of sound. Not like this one." The junior's voice was very careful. "It repeats. Every 40 hours. Exactly. It is not a star, and it is not a rock. The array tried to file it under known sources, and the file would not close, so it filed the sound under the only category left. It filed it under the fright tale category. Lector, the machine logged it as a human signal." The prayer tiers went still. 40 under-lectors did not breathe. The category was a joke, a dead drawer in the catalog the old priests had left in the machines as a kind of grim humor, a place to throw the unexplained so it could be laughed at and forgotten. Nothing had ever been filed there. Nothing was supposed to be fillable there. That was the point. The drawer was empty because the thing it named did not exist. Sumeth looked down at the young one for a long moment. He should have felt the practiced calm of the senior lector, the small amusement at a junior's excitement over a machine error. He had felt it 1,000 times, the gentle authority of a man who knows there is nothing in the dark. He reached for it now, and it was not there. In its place was a thing he had not felt since he was very young. Before the calling, before the verses, a thing he had no word for because the catechism had carefully never given him one. It was the feeling of a question he did not already know the answer to. After 300 years it was almost unrecognizable. It was almost like fear, and it was almost like hunger, and it sat in him while the bronze stars turned overhead and 40 under-lectors waited for him to laugh the young one back into his place. "Play it," he said. Resun-ko touched the prayer tier, and the reliquary spire filled with the sound from the deep. It was not a roar. That was the thing none of them ever forgot. They had all grown up on the fright tales, and in the fright tales the humans screamed and burned and came in fire, and so they had braced for something terrible. But the sound was not terrible. It was patient. It was a slow, low, repeating pulse, and under the pulse was something that the array had stripped of meaning but could not strip of shape, and the shape was language. Someone was speaking. Someone 11 days out in the cold beyond the outer sill was saying the same short thing every 40 hours, calm and unhurried, into a dark that the ascendancy had spent 11,000 years insisting was empty. Sumeth did not know the words. No one in the ascendancy knew the words. The language belonged to the nothing, to the category that did not exist, and so by every law of his faith, the sound he was hearing could not be a sound at all. But he was a lector of the Veil Ascendancy, the keeper of 9,000 hymns, and he had spent his whole life listening to the difference between a thing said by rote and a thing said because it was true, and he knew, standing in the high dark with the bronze stars turning over his head, that whatever was speaking out there in the deep was not reciting. It was warning. It was saying something it had said many times before, to many other peoples, in a voice with no fear in it at all, and it was waiting, with the terrible patience of a thing that has all the time there is, for someone in the ascendancy to finally listen. He should have ordered the array silenced. He should have buried the file in the dead drawer where it belonged, and sung the hymn again and let the lie hold one more generation. That was his duty. That was the safe and worthy thing. Instead he heard himself say the words that ended his old life and began the 19 days. "Find out what it is saying," said Lector Sumeth Vale, "and the gods help us if the fright tale was true." It took the catalog order 4 days to break the language, and they did not break it alone. Resun-ko was the one who found the seam. The signal carried more than the spoken words. Beneath the language ran a second layer, a slow, patient lattice of numbers and shapes that asked for nothing and threatened nothing and simply offered itself, the way a hand is offered open and empty before anything else passes between two strangers. It was a teaching layer. Whoever was speaking out there in the deep had built the message so that a people who had never heard their tongue could learn it from the message itself. starting with the count of small things and the names of the stars and working slowly inward toward meaning. It was the most patient thing Sumeth had ever encountered. It assumed the listener was ignorant, and it did not hold the ignorance against them. It simply began, gently, to teach. That patience frightened him more than any roar could have. Resun Ko worked through 3 nights without sleep, and Sumeth sat with the junior through most of them, because he found he could not leave the reading cell. There was a thing happening in the catalog order's hands that he needed to watch happen. The teaching layer did not unfold the way a code unfolds, all at once when the key is found. It unfolded the way a relationship unfolds, slowly, in stages, each stage earned by understanding the last. The humans had built it so that you could not skip ahead, you could not rush to the meaning and ignore the patience. To learn what the message said, you had to first sit inside the patience long enough to become a little patient yourself, and Sumeth understood, watching the young one's eyes change night by night, that this too was deliberate. The humans were not only teaching the ascendancy their tongue, they were teaching it, one careful listener at a time, how to listen at all. On the second night, Resun Ko looked up from the glowing lattice with an expression Sumeth had never seen on a member of the catalog order. "Lector," the junior said, "they are not afraid of us. I have read the deep watch logs of 40 conquered peoples. Every one of them, when the ascendancy first appeared in their sky, sent a signal full of fear. You can hear it in the shape of the words, the way they hurry, the way they bargain. This signal has no fear in it anywhere, not contempt either. They are not looking down on us. They simply are not afraid, and I do not understand what kind of people speaks to the Veil Ascendancy without fear and without hatred. I did not know there was a third thing a voice could carry." "Neither did I," said Sumeth quietly. "I have heard 9,000 hymns and 40 conquered tongues, and I have never heard the third thing. I think it is the sound a people makes when it has already decided not to lose, and feels no need to prove it. We have always made the other sound, the loud one, the one that proves. We never knew it was loud until we heard the quiet one." Because the Fright Tales had been clear, the humans, the priests had always said, were a monstrous people, fire-souled and hungry, a thing the gods had drowned in the deep before the worthy were ever made. If you wanted to scare a child into obedience, you told the child the humans would come. And here was the thing the priests had named the monster, and it was not roaring, it was being kind. It was spending its breath, across light years and across a barrier of total ignorance, to make sure that when its meaning finally landed, it would land understood. On the 4th day, Resun Ko brought Sumeth the words. They sat together in a small reading cell off the reliquary spire, the junior and the lector, with the broken open message glowing between them, and Resun Ko read the human words aloud, in a voice that shook only a little. "This is the Concord vessel long light of the human solar reach," the junior read. "We have heard your worlds. We have heard you for 200 of your years. We know you teach your young that we are a story. We are not a story. We are not coming to take your worlds, or to make you kneel. We are coming to ask one thing of you, and we will ask it only once, in person, where it cannot be edited or buried. We are 11 days out, and we are slowing as we come, so that you have time to listen. We have always given people's time to listen. Most do not use it. We hope you will be the people who does." Sumeth read it 3 times. Then he sat very still for a long while. 200 years, he said finally. "It says it has heard us for 200 years. Yes, Lector. In 200 years the Ascendancy has subjugated 40 worlds. We have emptied the Thren homeworld. We have catalogued the Osuari down to their last living family and sold the rest. We have done these things under the sky, loudly, certain no one watched, because we taught ourselves that no one could." He looked up at the young one. "And the monster from the Fright Tale was watching the whole time, and it did nothing. For 200 years, it did nothing but listen and learn our tongue, so that one day it could come and ask us, in our own words, to stop." Resun Ko had no answer. There was no answer in the catechism for this. Sumeth took the words to the High Ascendant. He should have known better. He had served 3 high ascendants in his long life, and he knew the shape of the office, the way the truth bent around it like light around a heavy star. The current high ascendant was a hard old creature named Voruth Sale Vale, and Voruth Sale had not climbed to the highest seat of a 900-world faith by entertaining doubts about its central lie. The cradle was empty, the ascendancy was first. Everything Voruth Sale was, every world he ruled, every soldier who died at his word, rested on that. To accept that humanity was real was not, for the high ascendant, a discovery. It was a demolition. So the high ascendant did what powerful people do when the truth is a demolition. He decided the truth was a trick. A heresy, Voruth Sale said, in the cold vaulted hall of the high seat, with his war priests ranged behind him and the great drowned human icon glowering down from the wall, the old propaganda image of the monster the ascendancy had taught its children to hate. Some enemy has learned our fright tale and turned it against us. The Thren remnants, perhaps. The free Ossuary. Someone clever who knows that the one thing that can crack a faith is a doubt aimed at its foundation. They have built a ghost and named it human and sent it to whisper at our walls. And you, Lector, you have carried the whisper into my hall. High Ascendant, Sumeth said carefully, the signal carries a teaching layer that no Thren and no Ossuary could build. It assumes total ignorance and corrects it without contempt. I have studied every tongue the ascendancy has ever conquered. None of our enemies has ever spoken to us this way. None of them could. They hate us too much to be patient. Then it is a weapon of patience, said Voruth Sale, and you have been disarmed by it. Look at yourself, Sumeth. 300 years a lector, and a single calm voice from the dark has you carrying its message like a faithful courier. That is what patience does. It is the oldest siege there is. You do not break the wall. You wait for someone inside to open the gate. He leaned forward. I will not open the gate. Whatever is coming, it is not a god, and it is not first, and it is not real in the way we are real. Send the war fleets to the outer sill. When the ghost arrives, unmake it, and let its silence be our hymn. Sumeth left the high seat that day a marked creature, though no one said so aloud. He had carried a doubt into the Hall of Certainty, and the hall had not forgiven it. The war priests watched him now in the corridors of the reliquary spire, and the senior lectors stopped speaking when he passed, and a quiet word went out that the old lector Sumeth Vale had spent too long alone with the heresy, and might himself need watching. He felt it land on him, the cold suspicion of a faith that defends its central lie by never letting anyone stand close to a true thing, and he found, to his own surprise, that it did not move him at all. He had heard the calm voice. After the calm voice, the cold looks of frightened priests were a very small weather. He thought often, in those first days, about why the High Ascendant had chosen to believe in a trick rather than in the humans. It was not stupidity. Voruth Sale was not a stupid creature. It was something harder than stupidity to cure. The High Ascendant could not afford for the humans to be real, and a thing a powerful creature cannot afford to be true simply stops being available to him as a possibility. The mind closes the drawer and bricks it over. Sumeth had done the same thing himself for 300 years, taught the lie and believed it, not because he was a liar, but because the truth had never knocked. Now it had knocked, calm and patient, in his own tongue, and the only difference between him and the High Ascendant was that Sumeth had opened the door before he remembered he was not allowed to. After that, you cannot close it again. That was the thing the High Ascendant was so afraid of, not the humans, the door. So the war fleets went out. The Ascendancy did not send a small force. It had never in 11,000 years met a thing it could not crush by weight, and it did not intend to start now. It sent the Sael Crusade, the largest standing fleet under the High Seat, 60,000 hulls, a wall of war temples and gun barks and ram priests that stretched across the dark beyond the outer sill like a second night laid over the first. 60,000 ships to silence one voice. The war priests laughed about it on the way out. They had a song for the occasion, a marching hymn whose words meant roughly, "We go to kill a story." Sumeth went with them. He told himself it was duty. The truth was simpler and worse. He had heard the voice from the deep, and some part of him that he could not silence with any hymn needed to see the thing the voice belonged to with his own eyes. He needed to know whether he had spent his life teaching children to disbelieve in something that was standing, right now, just past the edge of the dark, being patient. The sail crusade reached the outer sill on the 9th day, and the human ship was there, one ship. Where the array had marked the signal, there hung a single vessel against the cold, long and pale and unhurried, perhaps a tenth the size of an Ascendancy war temple, marked along its flank, with a script none of them could read, and a single symbol they could not stop looking at, a small image of a blue and white world. It did not run, it did not arm. As the wall of 60,000 hulls fell over it like a closing hand, the one ship simply turned its blunt nose toward the fleet, and the calm voice came again across the dark, in the Ascendancy's own tongue now, learned and offered back. "This is the long light," it said. "I am a forward voice of the solar reach. I carry no weapons that can harm your fleet. I came ahead so that you would have a face to refuse before you refuse the rest. I will ask you the question now, while there is still a small world's worth of time. Stop emptying worlds. That is all. Stop emptying worlds, and we never come closer than this, and you never see the rest of us, and your children go on believing we are a story. Refuse, and the fleet behind me comes to your sky to ask you in person. We would so much rather it was a story. Choose." The war priests did not choose. They had been told what to do with a ghost. 60,000 hulls opened fire on the single ship. Sumeth watched from the observation gallery of the lead war temple, and what he saw he never fully had words for, in all the years he had left. The fire of 60,000 ships converged on one pale hull, enough fire to crack a moon, enough fire to write the Ascendancy's certainty across the dark in light. And the one ship did not die. It did not even seem to strain. Something happened around it, a shimmer, a bending, a sense of the fire arriving and finding nowhere to land, as though the human vessel were not so much shielded as simply more real than the weapons sent against it, a solid fact that mere fire could not argue with. The barrage burned for 90 seconds. When it ended, the long light hung exactly where it had been, unmarked, unmoved, the small blue world still bright on its flank. And the calm voice spoke one more time, and this time there was something in it that had not been there before. Not anger. The humans never seemed to bother with anger, but a kind of patient sorrow, the sorrow of a teacher who has offered the lesson 3 times and watched it refused 3 times, and knows now that the hard way is the only way left. "You chose," said the long light. "I am sorry. I truly am. I will tell them you chose. They will come to your sky now, and they will ask you the same question I asked, and you will give them the same answer, and then they will make it so that you cannot empty worlds anymore. Not by killing you. We do not need to kill you. By something worse, which is this. They will let you live, and they will make sure that every world you have ever emptied is something you can never again pretend was a story. Goodbye. I wish you had been the people who listened. So few are." Then the long light turned its blunt nose toward home, and it left. It simply left. 60,000 hulls, the largest fleet of the Vale Ascendancy, and the single ship they had come to unmake, turned and accelerated into the deep at a speed that made the war temple's fastest pursuit look like a thing wading through tar, and within a minute it was a point, and within 2 it was gone, and the sail crusade hung in the cold beyond the outer sill, having fired everything it had at a story, and watched the story walk away unharmed. The war priests stopped singing the marching hymn. On the long flight back to Hessenreach, the cathedral world, the heart of the Ascendancy, Sumeth did not sleep. He sat in his small cell aboard the war temple, and he thought about the calm voice, and the small blue world, and the 90 seconds of fire that had found nowhere to land, and he understood, slowly, with the cold completeness of a man watching his own house take water, what the High Ascendant had refused to understand. The humans were not a weapon of patience. The patience was not a trick. The patience was simply what they were, a people who had heard the Ascendancy for 200 years and done nothing, who had sent one unarmed ship ahead so that the slaughter could be refused with a face attached, who had let 60,000 hulls empty their guns and then turned and gone home rather than answer fire with fire. A people like that was not patient, because patience was useful. They were patient because they did not need to hurry, and a thing that does not need to hurry, in a war, is the most terrible thing there is, because it means the outcome is already decided and only the lesson is still in question. He did not yet know how many of them there were. He did not yet know what the rest looked like. The fleet the Longlight had promised, the fleet that would come to the sky of Hessenreach. He knew only that he had spent 300 years teaching children that the deep was empty, and the deep had answered, in his own language, that it had never been empty at all, and that it had been watching, patiently, the whole time he had been lying. When the Sail Crusade limped home to the cathedral world, the High Ascendant declared a great victory. The ghost, he proclaimed from the high seat, had fled before the might of the worthy. The fright tale had been faced and found hollow. Let the hymn be sung. And the hymn was sung, across 900 worlds, the old lie about the empty cradle, louder now to drown the thing that had walked away unharmed. Sumeth stood on the prayer tiers of the reliquary spire and sang the words with the rest. Humanity does not exist. He moved his mouth around the sound and no sound came out of him, and beside him on the lowest tier, the junior Resenko also moved silent lips, and the two of them, the old lector and the young one, sang the lie together without making it, the only two creatures on the cathedral world who knew the deep was full. It would be 10 days before the rest of the humans came, 10 days in which the ascendancy congratulated itself, 10 days in which the war priests composed new verses about the fleeing ghost, 10 days in which Varuth Sale ordered 3 more worlds marked for emptying, to prove that the worthy did not change their course for stories. 10 days in which Sumeth Vale walked the halls of the reliquary spire and read, in secret, the rest of the teaching layer the long light had left behind, the part the High Ascendant had ordered destroyed, and the catalog order had quietly kept. Because the long light had left more than a warning. Buried in the patient lattice of numbers and shapes, offered the way a hand is offered open, was a history. Not the ascendancy's history. Theirs. The humans had included in the teaching layer a record of every people they had ever come to in this exact way, every empire that had emptied worlds and called the Watchers a story, every sky their fleets had risen over, and every choice those peoples had been given. There were a great many of them. The list was long, and Sumeth read it through twice, and what he found in it stopped his breath. The humans had been doing this for a very long time, crossing the deep, finding the strong feeding on the weak, arriving in the strong one's sky with the same calm question. Stop. The list recorded the answers. A few peoples, a precious few, had said yes, and the humans had turned and gone and never come closer, and those peoples were still there, still themselves, still free. But most had said no. Most had done exactly what Varuth Sale had done, fired on the forward voice, called it a trick, sung the lie louder. And the list recorded what came after the no, and it was not slaughter, and that was the thing that finally made Sumeth understand what was coming to his sky. The humans did not destroy the peoples who refused. They made them remember. He read the record of a place the humans named the Carrion Throne, an empire much like the Ascendancy, that had emptied 200 worlds and called the human ship a story. The humans had come to its sky. They had not fired. They had done something with the emptied worlds themselves, something Sumeth did not yet understand from the record, and afterward the Carrion Throne still stood, still held its worlds, still had its fleets and its high seat and its hymns, but it could no longer empty a world, not because it was forbidden, because every soul in it, every soldier and priest and child, now carried the full and unforgettable weight of every world it had already emptied, returned to them, made real, impossible to file under story ever again. The Carrion Throne had become a people who could see exactly what they had done, and a people who can truly see what they have done, the record noted, in the calm, patient human voice, does not do it twice. He read of others. There had been 31 skies in all, the record said, 31 peoples the humans had crossed the deep to find feeding on the weak. He read each one, late in the high dark, with the underlectors asleep and the bronze stars turning overhead. There was the Sunder hegemony, which had burned 40 worlds for their metals and called the human ship a Sunderlie, a thing invented by rebels, and which now kept a day of remembering each year that the whole hegemony spent in silence, unable to sing, listening to the names of the burned. There was the loom of Ak, which had unwound 9 worlds to feed its machines, and which had said no, and which now wove nothing, its great loom still and dark, a people that had simply set down the thing it had built itself around, because it could no longer bear the sound the looms made. And there were the 3 skies, only 3 out of 31, that had said yes. The humans had named those 3 the listeners, and the record spoke of them with a particular gentleness. 3 peoples that had heard the forward voice and looked at what they were doing and stopped before the fleet ever rose over their world, and the humans had turned and gone and never come closer, and the 3 listeners were still themselves, whole and free and unweighted, the only peoples in the whole long record who carried nothing, because they had chosen to stop while stopping was still cheap. Sumeth read of the 3 listeners for a long time. He read of the cheap yes, the one the ascendancy could still give, in the 19 days it had left, and then he thought of the high ascendant in the high seat, screaming that the cradle was empty, and he closed the record, because he already knew which list the ascendancy would join, and it was not the list of 3. That was the question the fleet was bringing to Hessenreach. Not will you die, the humans did not care whether the ascendancy died. The question was older, and worse, and kinder, all at once. Are you ready to remember? And Sumeth Vale, 340 years old, keeper of 9,000 hymns, sat alone in the high dark of the reliquary spire, with the human history glowing in his hands, and he knew the answer the ascendancy would give, and he knew it was the wrong one, and he had no power on all 900 worlds to change it. He could only wait, as the humans had taught him to wait, for the sky to fill. They came on the 19th day, at the hour the ascendancy called low song, when the cathedral world Hessenreach turned its night face to the deep, and the prayer bells across 900 temples rang the close of the day's hymns. There was no warning. That was the first lesson, and the ascendancy never forgot it. The long light had given 19 days of warning, slow and patient, and offered like an open hand, and the ascendancy had spent the warning singing. So when the rest of the humans came, they came without any warning at all, because warning is a courtesy, and the courtesy had been refused. Sumeth was on the observation gallery of the reliquary spire when the sky changed. He had not left the gallery in 3 days. He had told the underlectors he was keeping a vigil, and that was true, though not the vigil they imagined. He was watching the dark above Hessenreach, the same dark he had spent 300 years calling empty, and he was waiting for it to prove him a liar one final time. It did. It began as a wrongness in the stars. A patch of the night sky above the cathedral world simply stopped being the night sky. The familiar constellations the ascendancy had named after its own saints folded away, the way a reflection folds when a stone touches still water, and for one long breath there was nothing there at all, not stars and not black, just a hole in the sky shaped like something arriving. Sumeth gripped the gallery rail. The prayer bells went on ringing in the temples below, the underlectors still singing the close of day, unaware, and he wanted to scream at them to stop, to look up, to see. Then the human fleet warped above their world. It came all at once. Where there had been a hole in the sky, there were suddenly ships, and the ships did not arrive small and grow nearer the way an honest fleet arrives. They were simply there, complete, already enormous, already overhead, 1,100 warships of the human solar reach falling out of the fold and into a perfect silent ring around the cathedral world, close enough that their hulls threw shadows across the temples, close enough that the people of Hessenreach, looking up in the low-song dark, saw the underside of the deep itself open and pour iron onto their sky. 1,100 ships. Sumeth had braced for 60,000, for a horde, for a wall like the Sael Crusade. 1,100 was almost nothing by the arithmetic of the ascendancy. And that was the second lesson, and it landed in him like cold water, because the 1100 human ships did not need to be 60,000. Each one was vast, longer than a war temple, and built on a scale the Ascendancy's shipwrights had no language for, smooth and pale and unhurried, and each one bore on its flank the same small symbol the long light had carried, the blue and white world, repeated 1100 times across the sky like a signature. They did not arm, they did not fire, they simply hung there in their perfect ring, vast and silent and patient, and let the people below understand, slowly, in the way the humans always made you understand things slowly, that the story had come to the sky. There was a precision to the ring that Sumeth could not stop reading. The 1100 ships were not scattered the way a fleet scatters when it arrives, jostling for position, finding its formation. They had come out of the fold already arranged, every hull exactly spaced, the whole vast ring laid over the cathedral world with the care of a thing set down rather than a thing flown in, and the precision said something the size of the ships did not. It said we knew exactly where each of us would stand before we crossed the deep. It said this is not a battle we are entering, it is a thing we have already finished, and we are only now showing you the result. The Ascendancy's fleets arrived ready to fight. The human fleet arrived ready to be understood. Sumeth, who had spent his life reading the difference between a thing said by rote and a thing said because it was true, read the difference between those two kinds of arriving, and the cold went all the way through him. He looked down from the gallery at the temples of Hessenreich, at the prayer towers where the underlectors still sang the close of day, unaware, their voices rising thin into a sky that had become a ceiling of iron, and he wanted to weep for them, for all of them, for a whole world singing the lie about the empty cradle directly up at 1100 ships that were the lie's living refutation. The humans had timed it for Losong on purpose. He was sure of it. They had crossed the deep, slow, and patient for 200 years, and they had arrived at the exact hour the Ascendancy sang loudest that no one was there, so that the people would hear their own lie and look up and see, in the same instant, the truth hanging over it. That was not cruelty. The humans were never cruel. It was the most patient kind of teaching there was. You did not tell the student he was wrong. You arranged the world so that he could not help but see it. For one moment, before anyone in the Ascendancy understood, the cathedral world simply beheld them, and Sumeth would remember that moment all his life as the most beautiful and the most terrible he had ever known. Because the human ships were beautiful. He had not expected that. The fright tales had made the humans monstrous, jagged, burning, and the icon on the wall of the high seat showed the drowned maker with a face built to be hated. But the ships overhead were not monstrous. They were clean and pale and unhurried, and the small blue worlds on their flanks turned slowly in the Losong dark like 1,000 patient eyes. And the whole vast ring of them hung over the cathedral world with a stillness that was somehow more than the absence of motion, a stillness that was chosen, that was offered, the stillness of a hand held out and held open and held still so that the frightened thing might learn it would not strike. 11,000 years the Ascendancy had taught its children to hate a face, and the face had come, at last, and it was not a face at all. It was 1100 ships that had crossed the deep and arranged themselves with terrible care over a world that had fired on their forward voice, and had not yet, in all the time they hung there, raised a single weapon. The most fearsome thing Sumeth had ever seen was how gentle they were being. Gentleness, in a thing that size, that certain, was the most frightening fact in the universe, because it meant the gentleness was a choice, and a thing that chooses to be gentle could, at any instant, choose otherwise, and was choosing, instant by instant, not to. The prayer bells stopped. All across the night face of Hessenreich, the bells stopped one by one, as the priests in their towers finally looked up. And then there was no sound at all on the cathedral world, no hymn and no bell and no voice. 11,000 years of certainty held at the top of one indrawn breath, as 900 worlds worth of certainty looked up at the proof that the cradle had never been empty. The voice came from the fleet, and it came into every temple and every tower and every home and every catalog cell on the cathedral world at once, in the Ascendancy's own tongue, The same calm, patient voice the long light had carried, multiplied now, and somehow gentle for all its size, the voice of a people who had crossed the deep many times to say this exact thing to many other skies. "People of the Veil Ascendancy," the voice said, "we are the solar reach of the humans. You taught your children we were a story. We understand why. It is easier to empty a world if no one is watching, and easier still if you have decided no one could be. We have been watching for 200 of your years. We are sorry it took us this long to come. There are many skies, and we go to all of them, and we go slowly, because we would rather arrive too late than arrive in haste and become the monster you already believe us to be. We are not the monster. We have come to ask you one question, and we will ask it once, here, where it cannot be edited or buried or sung over. Stop emptying worlds. Say yes, and we leave this hour, and you never see us again, and your children may go on believing we are a story for all we care. Say no, and we will make it so that you cannot empty worlds anymore, by giving back to you everything you have taken, so that you can never again mistake it for a tale. We are not here to end you, we are here to wake you. Choose." In the high seat of the reliquary spire, the high ascendant Voruth Sail Veil looked up at the 1100 ships in his sky, and Sumeth, watching from the gallery, saw the exact moment the old creature understood that the demolition had come for his tower after all. He could have said yes. Sumeth would wonder, for the rest of his long life, what would have happened if Voruth Sail had simply said yes. The humans would have left. They had said so, and they had never once, in the whole long record, said a thing they did not do. The ascendancy would have gone on, smaller in its certainty but whole, its worlds intact, its hymns intact, its lie quietly retired. All it would have cost was the one answer the High Ascendant had spent his whole life unable to give. Yes, we will stop. We were wrong. But Voruth Sail Veil had not climbed to the highest seat of a 900-world faith by saying he was wrong. To say yes was to say the cradle had not been empty, that the ascendancy was not first, that the worthiness was a story the strong told while they took what they wanted. To say yes was to unmake himself, and a powerful creature, standing in the ruin of its certainty, does not reach for the truth. It reaches for the thing it has always reached for. It reaches for the weight. "We are the Veil Ascendancy," said the High Ascendant, and his voice went out across the cathedral world and up to the silent ring of ships, hard and clear and entirely without doubt, the voice of a faith that has never in 11,000 years met a thing it could not crush. "We have held 900 worlds since before your story was invented. The cradle was empty when the gods set us in it. It is empty now. You are not first. You are not real. You are a clever heresy in iron, and I will not bend the ascendancy to a heresy. Call every fleet. Call the Sail Crusade, and the Thren Watch, and the Deep Reserves. Call all of it. We will teach the story, how stories end." And the ascendancy answered its high ascendant the way it had answered for 11,000 years. It rose. From every shipyard and orbital fortress and hidden reserve of the cathedral world, the war fleets of the Veil Ascendancy rose into the low-song dark. Not 60,000 now. The full might of the faith's heart gathered to defend its highest seat, 210,000 hulls, war temples and gun barks and ram priests, and the great cathedral dreadnoughts that had not flown in 1,000 years. A tide of iron pouring up off the night face of the world, to surround the surrounders, to bury the 1100 under sheer overwhelming weight, the oldest answer the ascendancy knew. There were more of them than there were stars visible in the sky they rose into. It was the largest fleet the heart of the faith had ever assembled, and it rose with absolute certainty, because in 11,000 years the weight had never once failed. Sumeth watched it rise. 210,000 hulls climbing past the gallery of the reliquary spire, the wash of their engines lighting the cathedral world brighter than its own dim sun, the war hymn pouring out of every one of them, the marching song that meant we go to kill a story. He gripped the rail, and he did not pray, because he no longer knew which way the prayer should point. He watched the largest fleet of the worthy rise to swallow the 1100, and he found, to his own surprise, that he was not afraid for the humans at all. Beside him, the junior Resin Co had crept onto the gallery, drawn by the impossible sky. "Lector," the young one whispered, looking up at the two tides about to meet, the 210,000 and the 1100. "There are so few of them, we have so many, surely the weight." "No," said Sumeth quietly, "not this time." "How do you know?" "Because they let the long light walk away," he said. "Because they came 19 days slow and warned us the whole way. Because they are still, right now, with 210,000 guns rising at them, not firing first." He watched the 1100 ships hang motionless in their perfect ring as the tide of the ascendancy climbed toward them. "A people that patient is not patient out of weakness, Resunko. They are patient because they have already counted this. They counted it 200 years ago. We are not the first sky to say no. We are only the latest, and the humans do not come to a sky until they already know how it ends." "They counted us," Resunko whispered. The young one had read the same record Sumeth had read, in secret, the 31 skies and the 3 listeners. In the history, they wrote down what we would do before we did it. They knew the High Ascendant would say no. They knew the fleet would rise. They knew the barrage would come. "Lector, it is all in the record. It is the same in every sky that refused, the same exact shape. We are not surprising them. We are not even frightening them. We are doing the thing they crossed the deep certain we would do, and the only thing they did not know was whether we would be the 32nd sky to refuse or the 4th to listen. And we have just told them. We have just told them which one we are." "Yes," said Sumeth, "we have." He watched the 210,000 hulls climb the last of the distance to the silent ring, and he thought of the 3 listeners, the 3 peoples in all the long record who had said the cheap yes and kept everything, and he grieved, in the moment before the firing, for the easy answer the ascendancy would never now be able to give. The cheap yes was gone. It had been available for 19 days, and the ascendancy had spent the 19 days singing, and now there was only the expensive yes left, the one that came after the no, the one that cost everything the lie had been protecting. The humans would still take it. The record was clear on that too. The humans always took the expensive yes when it finally came, but it would come the hard way now, and the hard way meant the remembering, and the remembering meant the weight, and Sumeth, who had read what the weight had done to the Carrion throne, braced himself on the gallery rail for the thing he could not stop. The 2 tides met above the cathedral world Hessenreach. The ascendancy fired first. Of course it fired first. 210,000 hulls opened up at once, the greatest barrage in the history of the faith, enough fire to boil an ocean, all of it converging up and inward on the silent ring of 1100. The low song dark turned to day, the whole night face of Hessenreach lit white with it, the temples below throwing hard black shadows, the prayer tiers of the reliquary spire painted in the light of 210,000 guns firing at a story. And exactly as it had above the outer sill, the fire found nowhere to land. Sumeth watched it, and his mind refused it, and he made himself watch anyway. The barrage arrived at the ring of human ships, and it did not splash against shields, and it did not crater their hulls. It simply ceased to matter, the way a shout ceases to matter against a mountain, the way an argument ceases to matter against a fact. The 1100 ships hung in the heart of the greatest barrage the ascendancy had ever fired, and they were not harmed, and they were not moved, and after a moment Sumeth understood the thing that the High Ascendant would never let himself understand. The humans were not surviving the fire. They were ignoring it, the way a true thing ignores a lie told loudly enough. The fire was the ascendancy's certainty, 11,000 years of it, poured up into the dark, and it broke against the 1100 and ran off them like rain, and when it was spent, the human fleet was exactly where it had been, the blue worlds bright on every flank, the ring unbroken. And the calm voice came one more time, down into the sudden ringing silence after the largest barrage in the history of the faith had failed. "You chose," it said. "We heard you. Now we will answer. The 1100 ships began, very slowly, to turn. What the humans did next, the Veil Ascendancy never had a single word for, because it was not one thing, it was the most patient thing ever done to them, and it was done all at once across 900 worlds, and it began with the war fleet of 210,000 hulls. The 1100 ships finished their slow turn, and then they did not fire. Sumeth braced for the answering barrage, the return fire, the reckoning, and it did not come, and that absence was the first move of the lesson. The humans had been fired upon by the greatest fleet in the history of the faith, and they answered the barrage with nothing, with silence, with the same patient stillness they had carried for 19 days, and the silence was louder than any gun. Then the Ascendancy's fleet began to come apart, and not one shot was fired to do it. Sumeth watched from the gallery and could not at first understand what he was seeing. The 210,000 hulls, the war temples and gun barks, and the great cathedral dreadnoughts were not exploding, they were not burning, they were simply, one after another, going quiet. Their engines dimmed, their guns fell silent. The marching hymn that had poured from every one of them, the song that meant we go to kill a story, faltered and thinned and stopped, ship by ship, across the whole vast tide, until the largest fleet of the faith's heart hung motionless in the low-song dark, 210,000 hulls, drifting without power above their own world, and not one of them harmed, and not one soul aboard them dead. The humans had not destroyed the fleet. They had switched it off, reached into 210,000 ships at once, across the whole sky, and quieted them, the way you quiet a child mid-tantrum, firmly and without cruelty, and held them there, powerless and unhurt, and listening, so that what came next would be heard. And what came next was the remembering. It started in the temples. Sumeth, standing on the gallery of the reliquary spire with the silent fleet drifting overhead, felt it arrive in the cathedral world like a change in pressure, and then he understood that it was arriving in him. The teaching layer, the patient lattice the long light had carried, the open hand offered across light years, the thing built to teach an ignorant people the truth without contempt. The humans were not speaking it now, they were giving it, pouring it down out of the 1100 ships into every mind on Hessenreach and out across the deep to every mind on all 900 worlds. And it was not pain, and it was not punishment, it was memory, it was the worlds the Ascendancy had emptied, given back. Sumeth saw the Thren homeworld. He had never seen it. He had only catalogued the report of its emptying, 200 years ago, a clean, dry record of a population removed and a planet repurposed. Now he saw it. He saw the Thren as they had been before the Ascendancy came, their cities and their songs and the particular way the light fell across their inland seas at the hour they called gathering. He saw the families. He saw the small ones. He saw the day the war temples came, and he saw it not as a victory in a catalogue, but as the Thren had seen it, from the ground, looking up, and he felt, for the first time in his 340 years, the exact and specific weight of a single emptied world, multiplied across every soul that had lived on it, returned to him entire and impossible to file under anything but truth. And he was only one soul, and the Thren was only one world, and the Ascendancy had emptied 40. He saw the Ossuary next. He saw the catalogue he himself had once approved, the dry, clean record of a living people sorted into families and sold, and he saw now what the catalogue had been a record of. He saw the ossuary markets in the hour before the war temples came, the trade of small carved things they made from the shells of their inland creatures, the particular call the parents made to gather the young at dusk, 3 rising notes, the catalogue had never thought to record, because 3 rising notes cannot be sold. He felt the call. He felt it as a parent feels it, the reflex of it, the love folded into the habit of it. 3 rising notes at dusk for 10,000 years, and then the war temples, and then the silence where the call had been. The Ascendancy had a number for the ossuary in its registry. The humans gave back the 3 rising notes, and the number became a people, and the people became a wound, and the wound did not close, because the humans had not built it to close, They had built it to be carried. Sumeth understood then why the humans had been so slow. 200 years they had listened before they came. He had thought it patience, or caution, or the simple vastness of the deep. Now, with the Thren and the Ossuary pouring back into him, he understood it was none of those things. The humans had been slow, because to do this, to give a whole people back the weight of every world it had emptied, you had to first gather every world. You had to record the 3 rising notes that no one had thought to record. You had to buy back the songs that had been sold, recover the small carved things from the markets of 40 conquered peoples, reconstruct the hour of gathering on 40 different worlds, so that when you finally came to the sky of the emptier, you could give it back everything, entire, undeniable, with nothing left out that could be used to pretend it had only been a story. 200 years was not the humans being slow. 200 years was the humans being thorough. They had spent 2 centuries learning the dead so that the living could not forget them. And that, Sumeth thought, kneeling on the gallery under the weight of 2 worlds with 38 more arriving, was the most terrible patience in all the deep, and the most loving, and he could no longer tell the 2 apart, and he understood that the humans had stopped being able to tell them apart a very long time ago, and that this was the whole secret of what they were. Across the cathedral world, the people of the Veil Ascendancy fell to their knees, not in worship but under the weight, as 200 years of emptied worlds came home to them all at once. The war priests in their drifting silent ships, the underlectors on the prayer tiers, the catalog order in their cells, the high ascendant himself in the high seat. Every soul that had sung the lie about the empty cradle now carried, returned, and made real and impossible to refuse, the full remembered weight of every world the lie had let them empty. The humans gave it back. All of it. The Thren and the Ossuary and the 38 others, every life, every song, every last family catalogued and sold, poured back into the people who had taken them, not as accusation, not as torture, but as memory, so that the Ascendancy could never again look at a world it wanted and see a story it was permitted to empty. That was the weapon. That was the whole of it. The humans had crossed the deep with 1,100 ships, and the only thing they had fired was the truth. And it reached every world. That was the part the Ascendancy understood only later, when the reports came in from across the 900. The remembering had not fallen on Hessen Reach alone. It had poured out from the 1,100 ships and across the deep to every world the Ascendancy held, all at once, so that in the same hour, on 900 worlds, every soul of the faith fell under the same weight. The war priests on the frontier garrisons, the shipwrights in the orbital yards, the catalog orders in their cells, the farmers and the miners and the singers and the young, 900 worlds of a people that had spent 11,000 years certain the cradle was empty, kneeling in the same hour under the returned weight of 40 emptied worlds, and not one of them harmed, and not one structure broken, and not one life taken anywhere in all the 900. The humans had reached an entire interstellar faith in a single hour and changed every mind in it without firing a shot that could break a window. Sumeth had spent his life believing the Ascendancy's reach was the largest thing in the deep. He learned, that hour, what reach actually was. It was not the ability to take a world. It was the ability to give one back, to every soul that had taken it, at once, across 900 skies, and make them feel it. The Ascendancy had reached the way a fist has reached. The humans had reached the way the morning has reached. They simply arrived, everywhere, gently, and there was no defending against the morning. Sumeth knelt on the gallery under the weight of the Thren homeworld, and he wept, and beside him the junior Resenko wept, and across the cathedral world a faith 11,000 years old wept, because the cradle had not been empty, it had never been empty, and now they could feel exactly how full it had been, and how much of it they had thrown away. And here was the thing the humans had understood about the Ascendancy, that the Ascendancy had never understood about itself. The faith had always believed it was strong because it felt nothing. The worthy do not grieve, the Catechism said. The worthy do not flinch. A people that can empty a world and sing the next morning is a people that fears nothing, and a people that fears nothing cannot be beaten. The Ascendancy had mistaken its numbness for strength for 11,000 years, and the humans had simply, gently, returned the feeling. They had not made the Ascendancy weaker, they had made it able to feel, which the Ascendancy had always believed was the same as weakness, and which turned out to be the opposite, because the numbness had never been strength at all. It had only been the absence of the weight, and the absence of the weight was the only thing that had ever let the Ascendancy do the terrible things that it then had to be numb to survive. Break the numbness and the terrible things became impossible, not by force, but by feeling. The humans had not disarmed the Ascendancy. They had given it back its heart, and a people with a heart cannot empty a world, and that was the whole of the war, and it was won without a shot, in the silence after the largest barrage in the history of the faith had found nowhere to land. In the high seat, the high ascendant Varuth Sail Val did not weep. He raged. Sumeth heard it carried across the comm channels, the old creature on his knees under the same weight as everyone else, screaming up at the silent fleet that it was a trick, a heresy, a mind poison, that the worthy did not feel guilt because there was nothing to be guilty of, that the cradle was empty, the cradle was empty, the cradle was empty. He screamed it the way a man screams a hymn to drown a sound he cannot bear, and the humans, who could have silenced him as easily as they had silenced his fleet, let him scream. They let the high ascendant of the Veil Ascendancy kneel on the floor of his own high seat and scream the lie at the proof of the lie, because that, too, was part of the lesson. They were not there to make him agree. They were there to make him remember. What he did with the memory was his to choose, and the humans had never, in all the long record, taken a single people's choice away. They only made sure the choice was made with open eyes. When the remembering had finished pouring down, the calm voice came one last time, into the silence of a kneeling world. "It is done," it said. "We have given you back what you took. We have not killed one of you. We have not destroyed one ship. Your fleet will wake in 1 hour, whole, and you may fly it home. We are leaving now. We will not come closer than this ever again, because we do not need to. You cannot empty a world anymore, not because we forbid it, because you remember now, because the next time you look at a world and want it, you will feel the Thren, and you will feel the Asuari, and you will feel the weight of every life you have already taken, and you will not be able to pretend it is a story. We have done this many times to many skies. We know how it ends. You will be smaller now, and slower, and you will sing fewer hymns about your worthiness, and you will be, for the first time in 11,000 years, awake. We are sorry it had to be the hard way. So few skies choose the other one. Goodbye, people of the Veil Ascendancy. You were not a story. You were never a story. Neither were we." And the 1100 ships warped away. They left the way they had come, all at once, complete. The hole opened in the sky, and the constellations folded away, and then folded back, and where the human fleet had hung in its perfect ring, there was only the low-song dark again, the ordinary dark, the same stars the Ascendancy had named after its own saints, and below them 210,000 silent ships drifting unharmed above a kneeling world, and on the gallery of the reliquary spire, an old lector who would never sing the old hymn again. True to the human word, the fleet woke an hour later. 210,000 hulls came back to power, their engines warming, their guns intact, every soul aboard them alive and whole and changed. Not one ship had been lost. Not one life had been taken. The largest fleet the Heart of the Faith had ever assembled had fired the greatest barrage in its history at 1,100 human ships and had been switched off like a lamp and switched back on, unharmed, and that was somehow more total than any slaughter could have been. A destroyed fleet can be a martyr. A fleet that was effortlessly silenced and effortlessly woken and never once worth killing is only a lesson. The Ascendancy flew its fleet home, and every soul aboard it carried the weight, and no soul aboard it would ever again sing the marching hymn about killing a story. Sumeth went to find the High Ascendant. He found him in the high seat, alone, the war priests withdrawn, the great drowned human icon still glowering down from the wall, the old propaganda image of the monster the Ascendancy had taught its children to hate. Voruth Sael Vael sat on the highest seat of a 900-world faith and stared at the icon of the lie, and when Sumeth entered he did not turn. It was a trick, the High Ascendant said. His voice was hollow now, scraped out. A mind poison. We will purge it. We will sing the hymn until the poison clears. The cradle was empty. You feel the thrin, Sumeth said quietly. Right now. So do I. We will feel them for the rest of our lives. That is not a poison, High Ascendant. A poison fades. This will not fade, because it is not a lie laid over us. It is the lie being taken off. For 11,000 years we slept under the story that the cradle was empty, and the humans have done nothing to us tonight, but take the story away, and let us see the cradle as it always was. Full. It was always full. We just decided no one was there so that we could take what we wanted. He looked up at the icon, the monster that had never been a monster. We will not empty another world, not because they forbid it, because we cannot unfeel the thrin. That is the thing you cannot purge, and I think, in the part of you that is still awake, you already know it. The High Ascendant said nothing for a long time. 900 worlds, he said at last, very low. 11,000 years, and one calm voice unmade all of it in 19 days, and never fired a shot, and let us live. They did not unmake it, said Sumeth. The worlds are still ours. The fleets are still ours. The high seat is still yours. They unmade only the one thing the whole tower stood on, the empty cradle, and now we will have to find out what the ascendancy is when it is built on something true instead. He turned to go. I think that is the cruelest mercy I have ever heard of, and I think it is the only kind that lasts. The Veil Ascendancy did not fall. That was the part the neighboring empires never understood, the part that made the story of Hessenreach travel further and stranger than any tale of conquest ever had. The Free Osuari heard of it first, and they did not believe it. An empire of 900 worlds, the great emptier of skies, the faith that had subjugated 40 peoples in 2 centuries, visited by 1,100 ships of a species it had called a story, and at the end of the night, the empire still stood, its worlds intact, its fleets intact, every hull of 210,000 flown home whole, its high seat occupied by the same hard old creature who had ordered the worlds emptied. Nothing destroyed, nothing burned, no martyr made, no vengeance taken, no tribute demanded. The Osuari sent agents to confirm it, certain it was propaganda, and the agents came back with the same impossible report. The ascendancy had lost nothing the eye could see. It had only stopped. It had simply, totally, stopped emptying worlds. The 3 worlds Voruth Sael had marked for emptying in the 10 arrogant days, the 3 worlds meant to prove that the worthy did not change course for stories, were quietly unmarked. No order was given. No announcement was made. The war fleets assigned to them simply did not go, and no war priest could be found who was willing to take them there, because every war priest now carried the weight. Every one of them had felt the Thren homeworld from the ground at the hour called gathering, and a soul that has felt that cannot fly to do it again. The thing the humans had given back did not fade. It did not purge. It sat in the people of the ascendancy like a second heart, and it beat the loudest exactly when an emptied world was wanted, and so the world stopped being wanted. The High Ascendant ordered the hymn sung. The old hymn, the lie about the empty cradle, louder than ever, across 900 worlds, to drown the weight, and for a few days the world sang it. And then, on the cathedral world Hessenreach, in the high dark of the reliquary spire, the singing changed. Sumeth was the one who changed it, though he never claimed it. He simply stood on the prayer tiers at the hour of low song, before 40 under-lectors, and when the time came for the opening line, the line he had sung 9,000 times, the line that began every council of the faith, he did not sing the lie. He sang the truth instead. He sang, in the same old melody, so that the shape of the thing was familiar. A new first line. The cradle was never empty. Others crossed the deep before us. We were not first, and we are not less for it, and the worlds we took were full of song. He sang it alone, in the high dark, an old creature with a cracked voice, and the under-lectors went silent and stared, because to change the opening hymn was the oldest heresy there was, the one the icon on the wall had been painted to forbid. And then the junior Resunko, on the lowest tier, sang it back to him, and then another, and then the whole tier. And by the third night the new first line had spread through the reliquary spire, and by the end of the season it had spread, the way water finds every crack, across 900 worlds, sung in the old melody, so that it slipped past the war priests who tried to stop it. The cradle was never empty, until there was no longer a hymn in the Veil Ascendancy that began with the lie. The humans had not changed the Ascendancy's songs, they had only made the old ones impossible to sing, and the Ascendancy, awake now, had changed them itself. Voruth Sail Veil held the high seat for 2 more years, and then he gave it up. He was not deposed. There was no rebellion, no purge, no martyr. He simply called Sumeth to the high seat one evening at the hour of Losong, the same hour the human fleet had come, and Sumeth found the old creature sitting beneath the great drowned human icon, which he had ordered taken down 100 times and never quite been able to remove. "I have tried to unfeel the Thren," the High Ascendant said. "For 2 years, I have sung every purge hymn in the catalogue. I have fasted and prayed and ordered the array silenced and forbidden the new first line on pain of exile, and none of it has worked, and I am tired, Someth. I am so tired. The weight does not lift. It only grows heavier the longer I refuse it. I think that is the design. I think the humans built it so that the only way to set the weight down is to pick it up, to say the words, to agree that the worlds were full." He looked up, and his hard old eyes were wet, finally, after 2 years. "Help me say them. I do not know how. I have spent my whole life unable to say I was wrong, and now it is the only thing that will let me rest, and I cannot find the shape of it in my mouth." So Sumeth taught the High Ascendant of the Veil Ascendancy how to say he was wrong, the way the Long Light had taught the Ascendancy its own tongue, patiently, starting with the small things and working slowly inward toward the meaning. It took all night. And at the hour the night face of Hessenreach turned back toward its dim sun, Voruth Sail Veil stood beneath the icon of the monster that had never been a monster and said, in a cracked and ruined voice, that the cradle had not been empty, that the Ascendancy had not been first, that the worlds it had taken had been full of song, and that he was sorry. He said it to no one. He said it to the Thren, and when he had said it, Sumeth watched something go out of the old creature's shoulders that had been there for 300 years, and he understood that the weight had not lifted, the weight never lifted, but it had finally, for the first time, become a thing that could be carried instead of a thing that crushed. Voruth Sail stepped down at the next council. He named no successor and asked for none. He spent the years he had left on the outer sill, at the far listening array, the same array that had logged the first signal, listening to the deep. Listening, the underlectors said, for the humans. Hoping, perhaps, that one of the 1100 ships might pass close enough to hear that the Ascendancy had finally chosen the other answer, the one so few skies ever chose, the yes that came too late, but came. The humans never came back. They had said they would not, and they never said a thing they did not do. But Voruth Sail listened anyway, every night at the hour of Losong, until the night he did not come in from the array, and they found him there in the cold with the headset still on, an old creature who had ruled 900 worlds and emptied 40 of them and, at the very end, learned how to be sorry. The Ascendancy became something the galaxy had no name for. It did not become weak. The neighboring empires kept waiting for that, kept circling, certain that a faith that had stopped emptying worlds had stopped being able to defend them, and they learned otherwise. The 210,000 hulls still flew. The war temples still held the 900 worlds. But they held them now, and they did not take new ones, and when the free Osuari, emboldened by the strange new gentleness, tested the old borders, they found the Ascendancy's fleets exactly as strong as they had ever been and entirely uninterested in conquest, a wall that would not fall and would not advance, and the ossuary, who had expected either a victim or a tyrant, found instead a neighbor and did not know what to do with one. The story of Hessenreach traveled, and it did a thing the humans had perhaps intended, and perhaps not, though Someth came to believe they had intended everything. It traveled to the other emptiers. There were others in the deep, other strong peoples feeding on weak ones, other empires that had never met the humans and had their own version of the fright tale, their own friendly verses about the dark being empty. And the story of the Veil Ascendancy reached them, carried by traders and refugees, and the free ossuary, the story of the great emptier of skies that had been visited by 1,100 ships and made to stop, not by death, not by ruin, but by remembering. And some of those other emptiers heard the story and did what the High Ascendant had done. They laughed. They called it a tale, a heresy, a thing invented by the weak to frighten the strong. The cradle is empty, they sang, in their own tongues, on their own worlds. No one came before us. But some of them heard the story and went quiet. Some of them looked up at their own dark and wondered, for the first time, whether it might be full, whether some patient thing might be listening even now, slow and certain, learning their tongue, gathering the songs of the worlds they had emptied, so that one day it could give them back. Someth heard, in his last years, of an empire 3 skies over that had stopped its emptying without ever being visited at all, that had simply heard what the humans had done to the Ascendancy and decided not to wait to find out if it was true. They became, without ever meeting a human, a 4th listener, and Someth thought that this, too, was the humans being patient. They could not cross the deep to every sky. There were too many, and they went too slow, and they would always arrive too late for the worlds already emptied. But they did not need to reach every sky. They only needed to reach enough of them, hard enough, that the story did the rest. That the mere true rumor of 1,100 patient ships became its own slow warning, traveling faster than any fleet, so that somewhere in the deep, an emptier set down its weapons over a world it had meant to take, not because the humans had come, but because the humans might. The Ascendancy had become, without meaning to, the warning the humans carried to the skies they would never reach. The great emptier of 40 worlds had become the story that stopped the 41st. The Ascendancy returned the Thren homeworld. It could not return the Thren, who were gone, 200 years gone, beyond any returning. But it gave back the world, swept clean of Ascendancy works, left empty for whatever might one day come to it, and on the inland sea where the light fell at the hour the Thren had called gathering, the Ascendancy built a single thing, a low stone hall open to the sky, and inside it they kept the only Thren things that had survived the cataloging, the songs, recorded and sold and now bought back at ruinous cost from every corner of the deep. And on the hour of gathering, when the light fell across the inland sea exactly as it had for the Thren, the hall played the Thren songs to the empty world, so that the world would not forget what it had held, so that the Ascendancy would not forget what it had taken. It was the human's lesson made into a building. Remember, remember so that you cannot do it again. There was a question the underlectors asked Someth. In the years between, the young ones who had grown up under the new first line and could not imagine the old certainty, they asked him why the humans had bothered. 900 worlds. 11,000 years of a faith that called them a story. The humans owed the Ascendancy nothing. They could have passed by. They could have left the emptier to its emptying and gone on to gentler skies. Why cross the deep at all, slow and patient for 200 years, to wake a people that had fired on the forward voice and screamed the lie at the truth? Why not simply let the Ascendancy be what it was? Someth thought about that question for a long time before he could answer it, and the answer he found was not in the catechism, old or new, because the Ascendancy had never had a word for the thing the humans were. The closest he came was this. The humans had crossed the deep because they could not bear to know and do nothing. That was the whole of it, the engine under the patience, the thing that had built 1,100 ships and sent them slow and certain toward sky after sky. They had heard the Ascendancy for 200 years. They had heard the worlds being emptied, the songs being sold, the three rising notes going silent at dusk. And once you have heard a thing, the humans seem to believe, you are responsible for it, whether it is yours or not, whether anyone asked you or not. To hear a world emptied and pass by was, to them, a kind of emptying of its own. So they did not pass by. They never passed by. They went to every sky they could reach, too slow to save the dead, and too certain to be stopped. And they asked the one calm question, and they paid whatever it cost to make the answer stick, because the alternative was to know and do nothing, and that was the one thing in all the deep the humans could not do. The Ascendancy had built its whole faith on the freedom of owing nothing to anyone. The humans had crossed the deep to teach it the opposite, the heaviest and most human truth there was. That to hear is to owe, that the cradle is full, and a full cradle makes claims on you, and the only people who are truly free are the ones who have decided to answer them. Sumeth Vale lived another 40 years. He never took the high seat, though it was offered to him more than once. He said the high seat was for someone who had not spent 300 years teaching the lie, someone young, someone who had grown up under the new first line and could not remember a time the cradle was called empty. He meant Resin Ko, and in time it was Resin Ko, the junior of the catalog order who had raised one hand from the lowest tier and asked about a thing in the deep watch logs, who came to keep the high seat of a faith that no longer emptied worlds. Sumeth stayed in the reliquary spire. He kept the hymns. He rewrote them, slowly, over 40 years, every one of the 9,000, taking out the lie wherever it had hidden, and the work was not finished when he died, and that was as it should be, because the humans had taught him that some lessons are not finished, only carried. He spent his last years teaching the young, not the lie, the truth. He stood on the prayer tiers and he told the young of the Ascendancy about the 19 days, about the calm voice from the deep, about the long light that let 60,000 guns empty themselves and turned and went home, about the 1,100 ships that fell out of the fold above Hessenreach and fired nothing but memory, about the fleet of 210,000 that was switched off and switched back on and never worth killing, about the weight of the Thren homeworld at the hour called gathering. He told them the humans had not destroyed the Ascendancy. He told them the humans had done something far harder and far kinder. They had woken it, and the young, who had never sung the lie, who had grown up free of the empty cradle, listened to the old lector the way the Ascendancy had finally learned to listen to the deep, patiently, with open hands, and they believed him, because he had been there, and because the weight he carried was the proof. On the last night of his life, 380 years old, the keeper of 9,000 rewritten hymns, Sumeth Vale, climbed alone to the observation gallery of the reliquary spire, the same gallery where he had watched the sky fill, and he looked up at the low-song dark. The stars were just stars, the constellations the Ascendancy had named after its saints, the ordinary dark, the deep that he had spent his first 300 years calling empty and his last 40 knowing to be full. He looked for a long time. He was old and tired and not afraid, and somewhere out past the outer sill, past the far listening array where an old high ascendant had once kept his vigil, the humans were going on, ship by patient ship, sky by patient sky, arriving too late and too slow above world after world to ask the one calm question, stop emptying worlds. So few skies chose the easy answer. The Ascendancy had chosen the hard one, and had survived it, and had been remade by it, and that, Sumeth had come to believe, was the truest thing the humans had ever taught him, that a people could do a terrible thing for 11,000 years and still, if it was made to remember, become something worth being, that the cradle was full and had always been full, and that the only sin was the lie that let you forget it. He thought about the calm voice. Neither were we, it had said, at the very end. You were not a story. You were never a story. Neither were we. He had not understood it that night, with the weight of the Thren coming down on him. He understood it now. The humans had not come to Hessenreach as gods, or as monsters, or as the fright tale made flesh. They had come as one people to another, real to real, full cradle to full cradle, and the whole of their terrible patience had been only this, the refusal to let either of them be a story to the other ever again. The ascendancy had taught its children the humans were a myth. The humans had crossed the deep, slow, and patient and certain, to teach the ascendancy the one thing it had spent 11,000 years forgetting. No one is a myth. Every cradle is full. And the deep was never, not once, in all the long dark, empty. Sumith Vale smiled up at the ordinary stars, the keeper of the hymns, the man who had asked one young creature to find out what the voice was saying and changed 900 worlds with the answer. The prayer bells of Hessenreach rang the close of the day below him, the new hymn rising from 1,000 temples. The cradle was never empty, sung now by a people who would never again look at a world and see a thing they were permitted to take. He listened to it until the end. Then the old lector closed his eyes in the high dark, beneath the stars he had learned, far too late, and yet not too late at all, to call full. And somewhere out in the deep, the ascendancy had once sworn was empty. 1,100 ships flew on toward the next sky, patient as they had always been, carrying the only weapon that had ever truly mattered, the simple and unbearable and merciful truth that nothing the universe holds was ever only a story, and that the strong are never first, and that every emptied world remembers, if only someone crosses the dark slow enough, and kind enough, and certain enough, to make them.